Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Increased cooperation between China and Russia may be a significant threat, according to an annual U.S. threat assessment by 4 of our nation's top security officials. Who cares? I would hope that the answer to this is obvious. I would hope. But the report includes a lot of different things, and we're going to try to walk you through some of the most significant ones today. One of them being you could care because some of our closest Western allies may be trying to ignore our advice and directly negotiate with Iran. Cybersecurity and election integrity is at stake. And perhaps one of the biggest things, too, is 4 of our top security officials are not in agreement. And so we're going to look at that as well, because, in other words, there's a lot of different ways you could care, a lot of different reasons. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to there's a lot of information in this report that should be concerning because it concerns our national security. So we're talking about your life, kind of. And at the very least, we're talking about the integrity of our elections, which, again, I would hope everybody cares about, because it's kind of what our nation is built on, right? Is this idea of majority rule, elect our officials, not others elect them for us. So, of course, we can't begin this critical conversation on national security without our senior resident historian,
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Lots today. You pulled out one article and I found 2 supporting. So we better get busy and get going here, because I think there's a lot of very important things to cover here. Very, very important issues, and at least make people aware of them, and then they can go find out more on their own.
So the Wall Street Journal on January 30th reports U.S. intelligence officials warned Tuesday of increased threats to national security from tighter cooperation between China and Russia, while also differing with President Trump in their analysis of North Korea's nuclear intentions and the current danger posed by Islamic State. So that kind of lays the groundwork for everything we're talking about. The China and Russia thing is definitely up first. So the warnings were contained in an annual threat assessment that accompanied testimony by Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats, Federal Bureau of Investigation Director Chris Wray, Central Intelligence Agency Director Gina Haspel, and other leaders of U.S. intelligence community who appeared Tuesday before a Senate panel. The assessment cautioned that Beijing and Moscow are pouring resources into a, quote, race for technological and military superiority, end quote, that will define the 21st century. It said that the 2 countries are more aligned than at any point since the mid-1950s.
That's huge. I mean, it's, the one thing we were worried about after World War II was that these 2 communist countries would come together and try to take us on, and they were able to stay apart that whole time, and it enabled us to sort of isolate China, concentrate on the Soviet Union, and then Nixon broke down the barrier in the early 70s and made the trip, the first American president, to communist China. And they've been at odds ever since. So my big fear is an old one, that these 2 European/Asian superpowers could come together. And it looks like we are starting to drive them closer and closer together as they seek opportunities to increase their power and control in certain regions of the world.
So it goes on to explain that, quote, some U.S. allies and partners are seeking greater independence from Washington in response to their perceptions of changing U.S. policies on security and trade, end quote. That's according to the report issued to Congress. As China and Russia seek to exert more influence regionally and globally, alliances between the U.S. and its Western allies have weakened, the report said. The efforts by China and Russia could lead to a higher risk of regional conflicts, particularly in the Middle East, East Asia, and other areas, according to the report. So this, hopefully you're seeing this is all interwoven because it's all part of the report. That's also interwoven in the reason that I mean, I would contend one of the reasons that Russia and China see this as an opportunity where their goals align for them to work together is because our allies are less certain about where we stand, not only on trade, but on international foreign policy, which ultimately is relevant to their security. So they're starting to make some moves. Russia and China look at, a good time to make a play is in the chaos of this changing dynamic. So they're probably aligned in the respect that, if they can sucker punch us kind of, and I don't mean by striking us or something like that. I just mean if they can, get a low blow in while we're not paying attention.
Right.
Then of course they want to do that.
Well, it's low risk, right? Because we have a nationalist president who's wanting to close up the borders and just worry about things that are going on inside the United States. So there's less likely for the U.S. to intervene if Russia or China decide that they want to land grab, natural resource grab or whatever. I mean,
and he's already being tough on them though, too.
Right.
I mean, as far as he's already not being nice to China with the trade war. And I know we talk about him being friends with Putin, but it's not exactly like Russia and the United States have a really close economic partnership
that we know of.
Yeah. I mean, so how much do they really have to lose, I guess is kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah. My point is it's a very advantageous time for them to reach out and try to do some things that they've always wanted to do because this is the time in the last 60 years when the United States would be least likely to respond. So it's a perfect opportunity to try something. And it's like when mom's busy, and use this analogy, mom's busy at the stove cooking dinner and you reach into the cookie jar because mom's back is turned. And you might still get caught and get your hand slapped, but the odds are this is a better time than mom standing there talking to you, asking you about school. And
she's looking right at you. So I think that's what we're seeing here. It's just they see it as a good time to try to do some things that they would like to do because the U.S. is not really strong with their allies right now. And we're worried about things within our own country, at least on the surface, more so it seems than we are what's going on outside the rest of the world. As I perceive it, the report focuses on Russia and China seeking to strengthen their military, but in a more modern way. And this is a key. It outlines that it is relatively undisputed. I mean, publicly, Russia or China may say something like, the U.S. doesn't have the world's greatest military. But in reality, everybody really accepts that in traditional military power, the U.S. is not outmatched. Right. The question becomes, in new modern warfare on the cyber front, it's kind of hard to know where we stand. I mean, for the everyday people like you and I, Lance, it's hard to know. Now, I imagine that people in our intelligence community have a better understanding. Obviously, that's why they do what they do. It seems, though, that they see the Russia-China team up as a significant enough threat to include in this annual report to Congress. So I would imagine that means even if they're not on the same level, cyber attack wise, cyber infrastructure wise, they obviously have enough advancement to pose a reasonable threat. Otherwise, why mention it? I mean, if they're not right, if there's no threat, then it doesn't make any sense to include it. One of the things that almost everybody agrees with as far as China, even the president, is the intellectual espionage that is going on in technology. Frequently stealing our companies' inventions. And then making it cheaper because of their economic system and government system that they have. So we all agree that they're stealing our ideas. And then we also, for the most of us, we agree that there was some kind of Russian intervention in our last election. And we have another major election coming up. And according to the FBI, CIA, and National Intelligence Directors, we have nothing in place to stop them from doing it again. I mean, immaterial of whether the president was involved or not. I don't think very many people would argue with the fact that the Russians did not try to play a role in our last
presidential election. I'm not even going to, I won't get into what the president's role was or was not in it, but I think we all agree that they did play a role in that. And
our intelligence community says so. And they're saying we don't have anything in place to stop them from doing it again in the next 18 months. The report
that's that cyber stuff that you're talking about. And that's a whole different ballgame.
The report also said that U.S. adversaries are likely already targeting the 2020 presidential election with online influence operations akin to those launched by Russia during the 2016 election cycle. The rise of so-called deep fakes, technology that can create convincing but false video and audio, probably will make online influence campaigns more potent, the report said.
Yep.
So this is, again, by the intelligence community and the military together, this report that they're providing, outlining kind of what has happened, what's to come, what we need to be aware of. And it is a rare opportunity. This is an annual thing that happens. It is a rare opportunity for the public to get a better idea of what's going on as well. Granted, obviously, they're not going to release the details of this kind of stuff because that would defeat the purpose of what they do and it would make it more difficult for them to do their job. It's also an opportunity, for them to choose things that they want to make sure Russia and China know or anybody else. And we have to keep that in mind too. Sometimes they might say something, they might make it sound worse or better than it is, might stretch the truth a little bit for the purpose of giving our adversaries some pause, maybe, or encouraging our allies, or, you know what I mean? We just have to be careful on, I'm not saying we shouldn't trust what they're saying. I'm just saying we have to remember that it's their job to protect us. And I don't think it's far-fetched to assume that they might say things that are intentionally geared toward making Russia and China spend time or energy looking into something that they don't need to look into.
Well, and I think,
and historically we've done that. I mean,
right,
more than once, many times. So just reminding people that it's a two-way street here. They interfere with our elections. We might be doing the same thing, but we actively also disseminate misleading or false information in their direction to intentionally divert them away.
That's true.
Like our whole, we've got a shield thing that,
sure.
And then Russia spends a whole bunch of time and money trying to develop one.
Right. And when the Allies used General Patton to divert the Germans' attention before D-Day. I mean, disinformation is a big part of the game.
Sure.
On both sides.
So we'll look at next. That's kind of the China-Russia component. Again, all of these are interwoven. So it's not just there's one of these in its own silo. They're all part of the report and they're all interconnected. With Iran, what we're looking at here is the report explains, Mr. Coates specifically said actually that the U.S. intelligence officials didn't believe the nation was developing a nuclear weapon, challenging the assertions from President Trump that the nuclear pact he withdrew from last year was ineffective. Mr. Trump made the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal reached in 2015 one of his most prominent foreign policy goals. Quote, "We do not believe Iran is currently undertaking the key activities we judge necessary to produce a nuclear device," end quote, Mr. Coates said. They are making some preparations that would increase their ability to take a step back from the deal, but at that moment, technically, they are in compliance with the 2015 pact.
Again, you have the president who's out there saying one thing, and then you have his intelligence people saying something totally different. So you have to, take it with a grain of salt as to what the president or anybody's saying, because the president can rely on his new Secretary of Defense, who gives him information that supports what the president wants to say. But then you have these three leaders of our intelligence groups, along with Senate leader Mitch McConnell, who are doing things because they don't agree with what the Secretary of Defense is saying. So that's really important, I think, for people to understand that the truth is somewhere out there, but we're getting different reads based on who you're listening to. So those in your, in our audience who say all the time, well, you guys never believe the president. Okay. But here are people within the government structure who disagree with the president and the assumptions of the Secretary of Defense. And that's what we're trying to point out, is that our own government's officials are disagreeing here on what to do with Iran and how dangerous of a situation it is.
So, Lance, this seems like as good a time as any. You're kind of talking about what we're trying to do, how this process is working. There's a lot naturally that goes into this particular conversation. There's a lot of information we're trying to get through, but we still have to take time to remind people what we're trying to accomplish, what the end goal is. So tell us, what is that?
Well, we always try to educate our listeners by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
And of course, anytime that you feel that we're not in keeping with that standard, it is your job to keep us accountable. Email ethics@truechat.org. Likewise, it's your job to give us your thoughts and opinions. If they're different from ours, if they're the same, maybe you have something we haven't thought of. All that information is helpful. So you can get in touch with us through social media at TrueChat.org, TrueChat.org on all social media. So let us know your thoughts, please. We're interested. Again, we're kind of looking at this intelligence report that was presented to the Senate and is available now kind of to the public, the testimony of these top security officials. And we've talked so far about China, Russia, the Iran component here. The other side of this Iran component leads into also kind of what I was talking about before, which is France, Britain, and Germany, who are, despite what we're saying to them, which is, hey, we don't want you to do this, they're saying, well, we don't care, and or we don't care enough to not do it. We're going to go ahead and try to establish the beginnings of trade relations with Iran. Because, hey, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Lance, but if you're France, Britain, and Germany, Iran's doing what it said it would do.
Right.
In terms of its nuclear pact.
Right.
Even though the U.S. backed out, it's still holding up its end of the bargain. So we're going to hold up the other end of the bargain and start looking at ways to help them economically or not hurt them as much economically as maybe we have been.
And the U.S. president has basically looked at those three and said, you know what? You can't depend on us anymore because you're not doing things that we want you to do. And so those three countries are kind of in limbo. Like, well, we've always, kind of followed what the United States wanted to do because we could count on the United States supporting us if something ever happened to us. Well, those three countries don't really know now whether or not we would come to their support, and come to their aid, because the president has said that as much. And so if if you're not sure that somebody's going to look out for you, then you have to look out for yourself. And so it's perfectly understandable that if the U.S. has been pulling support away, does there really need to be a NATO, for example, as President Trump has said? You pull out of the environment accord, that you're not going to follow the rules as established that President Obama said he would, with the other European allies as far as taking the climate accord and all that into account. And you're going to pull out of all of these deals that you've made with these countries. Then who can blame the European Union to say, well, we need to make sure we're okay in the future if we can't count on the United States like we have since the end of World War II. So it's just a fallout from the president's policy. Again, at this point, I'm not attacking. This isn't about attacking or supporting the president's policy. It's just that, okay, folks, if you're not going to support these countries, if the United States isn't going to support these countries,
there are consequences.
There are consequences. Exactly. That's just the point that we're trying to make today, or at least I'm trying to make today. I'm not getting into whether it's right or wrong, but it's perfectly understandable that they would do these things.
It just makes sense. I mean, they're not going to listen. They're not going to listen the same way that they have in the past to what we have to say if we're not providing them the same assurances we provided in the past. Because it is all, as much as it may sound harsh, I guess, it is a transactional thing. the reason that they stay our close allies is because they're in our security blanket. I mean, that's probably number one reason. There's a lot of reasons, obviously, but the number one reason they maintain such close relations with us is because they know that the world's best military is going to be there to defend them if stuff goes down.
Well, along with all those other security pieces like
intelligence sharing and all the stuff we never see, that's
cyber
behind
warfare
the scenes,
and everything
right.
else that the U.S. supplies them. But we have, and before we always had leaders, the United States always had leaders who said the best way to defend the United States was to keep these people under our umbrella. We now have, and I'm not saying right or wrong. That was the case. We now have a president who has said, we're going to take care, the best way to take care of the United States is to only worry about us. Okay. If you announce that to the people that you used to take care of, then you have to expect that they're going to then, well, if all the United States is going to do is worry about themselves in such a fashion that they're not going to do anything for us, then we have to go out and do things to take care of us. Before, those countries would do what we wanted them to do because they counted on us taking care of them, because our leaders felt like us taking care of them was also the best way to protect the United States. So we've had a change in philosophy. So these people are going to go out and protect themselves the best way they know how.
We'll look at North Korea next. So this is, again, still coming from the Wednesday, January 30th Wall Street Journal. On North Korea, the assessment raised questions about Mr. Trump's predictions that he will be able to persuade Pyongyang to give up all of its nuclear weapons, while North Korea, quote, has reversibly dismantled portions of its weapons of mass destruction infrastructure, end quote. The report said U.S. intelligence, quote, continues to assess that it is unlikely to give up all of its WMD stockpiles, delivery systems, and production capabilities. North Korean leaders view nuclear arms as critical to the regime's survival, end quote.
Yeah, go back to this summer and listen to us.
So it's
I talked about that they're not ever going to give this up because they see it as, the North Koreans see this as a necessity to stay in power. I mean, when the president says, I'm going to talk him, and schmooze him into getting rid of everything, I said, no, it's not going to happen, because they believe they need these things to stay in power. And that's what our intelligence committees are saying now.
And the interesting thing is, when you think about, is there any scenario in which loss of nuclear weapons peacefully with North Korea is possible? The only situation in which I think that is possible, because again, the key word being peaceful. I mean, there's a lot of forceful, we try to assassinate the leader, we try to invade, we wipe them off the face of the earth. I mean, all kinds of military or death-related options, but peaceful options would be, I think, if the North Korean regime really believed that being united as one Korea, they would then have more power than they have now, even if they didn't have nukes. Right. In other words, the new leader would be the top commander of all of Korea as opposed to just North Korea.
Right.
That might be a situation where, okay, then maybe we'll do this.
But why would the South Koreans ever agree
exactly
to let it's a dictator become their leader?
It's a relatively improbable scenario, because there's all kinds of, say that happens, right? For whatever reason, South Korea agrees to that and they reunite. And now these North Koreans start to understand how South Koreans live, which we've already seen some of in this cultural exchange. And then they get angry and you have some kind of civil war start between the state and the people because they don't like, so not likely is, yeah, I think what they're saying is there's little to no hope of a peaceful disarmament of North Korea.
Well, I think it's very important to say, because the president said, well, they're making changes. And the Intelligence Committee said they are making changes.
They are.
But they're reversible changes.
Right.
Okay, they didn't say irreversible. They said reversible changes, meaning, okay, they've done these things, but it wouldn't take very much for them to put them back into place.
They could undo them.
So again, we can't really accuse the president of lying, because the North Koreans have done some things. But according to the Intelligence Committee, they're not things that the North Koreans couldn't very quickly put back into place.
And of course, we couldn't get out of a conversation about President Trump without talking about the border wall. And in fairness, this is not because Lance and I want to throw this in there. I mean, we're talking about it because we think it's important to talk about, but it's being included because it's included in the report. Or rather its lack of inclusion in the report is noteworthy. Right. In other words, the report also did not include a national security justification for building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, a priority of Mr. Trump's that he has repeatedly described as necessary to combat a critical security crisis, though it did say drug trafficking from Mexico posed a growing risk to public health and safety, and that U.S.-bound illegal migration from Latin America showed, quote, no signs of abating, end quote. Officials weren't asked about border issues in the hearing. No surprise, because the committee is Republican controlled, and they're not going to try to do something that would give any more fodder than the report perhaps already gives. I think the thing that comes to mind here, Lance, is talking about what we've already discussed, which is there's no national security justification for it, which in my mind, say in this, with less than 3 weeks now before the deadline, before we'd shut down again, President Trump moves to declare an emergency. I would think this report would be something that comes up in arguments to the Supreme Court saying, well, the intelligence community says that there's no national security justification for this. So how can the president, he's in disagreement. He's saying there is, they're saying there isn't. So
if as we've spoken,
you know what I'm getting at there?
Yeah. The leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, has started to show some breaks from the president. What would happen if he put forth a bill that the Republicans and the Democrats both signed and sent to the president, that the president would have to veto, that would not give him his physical wall, but would do the protection that everybody, for the most part, the majority agrees needs to be done with drones, personnel, whatever, but not a physical wall. If the Republicans and Democrats sent a bipartisan bill to the president and he vetoed it and then tried to declare an emergency. I mean, I think if the politicians really want to cut the president's knees off, so to speak, as far as being able to do that,
they have that option.
That's what they should do, is come up with something that addresses the issues that they both want, that have anything to do with the wall, give them the funding, for drones, personnel, satellites, whatever you want that you think will work, so that, you don't put up a wall and then people just dig underneath it. That both Democrats and Republicans have said that's kind of a silly thing. Even the Republicans who come from the states that are along the border
and the boats that go around
a physical
it.
wall, right? And the boats that go around it, and the whole drug thing that we've already talked about come through ports of entry and not the wall, and yada yada yada. But put the president on record of saying, "Hey, you've got bipartisan support. Here's $6 billion to do the things that we in Congress agree, and this is the way the game's played, Mr. President. This is how we get to spend the money." Okay. And this is what we come up with. And then if the president vetoes it, I'm not sure he would, but if the president were to veto it, then like you said, at the State of the Union address, lays out his plans to declare an emergency, he really can't, because not only besides this report, you have Congress, you have the other branch of the government to say it's not an emergency.
So let's end with this, Lance. You're called in, you're brand new senior advisor to the president. How do I get out of this? Because
I say no. That way I wouldn't be his advisor, because I won't be a yes man for him. Because we all know that the best leaders in the United States history have been people who brought in opposing viewpoints so that they could listen to both sides. President Trump won't do that.
If you were going to,
at least so far, his first 2 years, he hasn't done that.
If you were gonna then you're President Trump, and you have to figure out a way out of this conundrum you're in, which is that you've put a lot of, because I mean, in less
I know
than
what
three,
you're saying. I've
in
got
less
an
than
answer
3
for you.
weeks, we've got the same problem again, right? Which is who's going to blink first. And this time the president blinked. I mean, and that's not, it's again, neither here nor there. Depends on who you are. For some people, that's great. Everybody's happy that he blinked. And for other people, it's terrible and they're upset that he blinked. But he's made his signature thing the wall. So how does he get this thing either out of having to do it, or how does he get it done?
If he wants to get reelected in 2020, what he has to do is he has to get support for an infrastructure bill and tie it to border security and say, okay, we're not going to build a wall per se, but we're going to improve border security with drones and technology and everything else. And we're also going to create more jobs because we're going to use this as part of an infrastructure plan where we're going to go in and redo the roads, and we're going to do sewer systems, and we're going to do airports and everything else. And we're going to put Americans back to work, and we're going to put more money in your pockets. And then all of a sudden people are going to be interested in he is a big one. And this is a plan that he would like because he's big on diverting attention. So you do the whole border security thing. You don't have a wall per se, but you start building other things that will create jobs in construction, that will lead to a trickle down effect because more people working in construction, they're going to go buy more things for their homes, or they're going to look to get a home instead of living in an apartment. They're going to buy more food. They're going to open up, restaurants and everything else. And it's going to just get the country and keep the country moving economically to make up for the shutdown. And he can go into the 2020 election with the economy staying strong. He can avoid a recession in 2019 or 2020 that will hurt his candidacy. He can put more Americans back to work, and he can point and say the border is more secure now than it was when I took over.
So that's the solution.
Jackson for president in 2020. There you go, folks. That would be what I would run on.
Yep.
I would run on that platform.
It would work for him too from the builder.
Because I can also balance.
It fulfills that he wants to build things.
Right. I'll also balance the budget because I'm going to, close military bases and put these people to work in doing other things and cut defense spending. And I will balance the budget for the first time since Bill Clinton. And what will that do economically for the United States? And I will reconnect with our allies, and, I can hold the line on, hey, you guys do have to come up with some more money and some more support here, but the United States has got your back. We're here. We're all in this together, and let's go back to work, and let's see what we can do for the climate. And I'm going to put people back to work, and I'm going to put more money in their pockets, and I'm going to balance the budget at the same time.
Boom. Got it done. So let us know your thoughts about Jackson 2020. So,
right.
Jackson for president.
I don't know. I mean, I went a little far fetched there.
Yeah.
But if I were an advisor to the president, that's the kind of direction I would take him to try to convince him. Okay. You're not going to build your wall, but you're going to build other things. And we're going to talk about you've improved border security, and you're using technology to do it, which is a good move for the future of the young people in America, because we're using technology. We're not going back. We're going to move forward, and then we're going to build more things for you. Now that we've taken care of border security, we're going to build roads. We're going to build airports. We're going to build schools. We're going to not build them, but rebuild them, update them. So
let us know your thoughts on the Lance Jackson plan. And, of course, everything that we talked about today. There was a lot to get through at TrueChat.org on social media. And, of course, you can listen to TrueChat Podcast anywhere fine podcasts are found, like
Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. Sometimes you just hold an apple up to your ear. You can hear it.
For the State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change.